to the 11 o'clock lecture. My name is Christie Felsing, and it's always a pleasure to be at the American Suzuki Institute here in Stevens Point. It has such an incredible history from its inception until this current year, so it's a really special place. How many of you are here as parents at the start of your Suzuki journey? For example, your child started in the last year or so. Okay. And how many of you are within that 1 to 5 year range? Anyone above that in terms of 10 and above? Can I put you on the spot?
Well, I was a Suzuki student as a child, so I sort of consider myself a lifelong learner. So,
Yeah.
But my daughter has been playing for 3.5 years.
It's really neat to see everything come full circle
Sure.
in that way too. And Gretchen, how about you?
My oldest is 22,
Okay.
and she was a Suzuki kid.
Excellent. So you've gone from the very beginning of the journey through
Through
teenage
the
years
end.
and
Yeah.
beyond. Excellent. Well, thank you, first of all, for all of the parental commitment. It is a lifelong journey, and I love your description of the lifelong learning that Suzuki has. Today I'm going to be talking about essentially what I consider the best practices of highly functional Suzuki families and Suzuki students. To me, when I return to these 7 key points, it helps me as a teacher think about how I can help families avoid some of the slumps, or perhaps check into one of these key components to say, how is your listening going? How is such and such going? So that we can overcome that hurdle and hopefully launch people forward in a successful learning process. So I'm going to be talking about 7 different concepts, and I'm going to give a disclaimer, and the disclaimer is that they're not presented in any specific order. So number 2 isn't any more important than number 6, for example. The first one I want to talk about is listening. And I think it's really important for all of us to think about why do we listen? Regular listening allows for success to happen. If a child is listening, they have the model in their ear, and they have that reference so that they're able to self-correct without you as the parent constantly saying, well, that's a D sharp, not the D. Remember, that's the D sharp, not the D. So if they have that reference of the D sharp in their head, they'll have a better sense of knowing what they're trying to achieve in that sound. So having that oral vision is so important. So for example, if I sang twinkle, twinkle, little, how I wonder what you already have that oral sense in your mind of how that tune goes. Our brains are like computers, and I think we are constantly self-correcting whether we realize it or not. And I often think about this with in our world of technology on cell phones with texting. You have that self-autocorrect button that is available on smartphones. Same thing with our fingers. If they have a reference, they're going to be self-correcting in that same manner. So listening provides that model of excellence so that students can develop the sensitivity of musicality in their playing, as well as develop a sense of tone. And for string players, intonation is such a huge factor for having that reference. If you're having a daily diet of listening in your nutrition, I think it eliminates the question of, well, how does that song go? And so there's a lot of frustration that's eliminated on all parts of the Suzuki triangle if we have a reference happening. For me, there's many different ways to structure one's listening program, and I think all of your home teachers have excellent suggestions, and we have several teachers in the room that probably you could pick their brain and they could give you 5 different ways of structuring listening. So I'm just going to share a couple that have been really impactful for me and my students over the years. And one is a concept called listening like a maniac, and this term comes from Michelle Horner, who's a Suzuki guitar teacher out east, as well as a violin parent. Her violin child is now in college in Europe, but she has thought about listening in so many different manners, and one way that has really helped her as a parent with her violin child growing up was the concept of doing more intensive listening. So she would do a loop of the current piece 10 times in a row, a loop of the upcoming piece 10 times in a row, and then a loop of the piece below the current piece 10 times in a row. So you have those boom, 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 3 in a row that way. And then the rest of her listening loop would just be the remainder of the book level. And so to get that intensity of listening saturates the brain even better. So just to give an example, if your student is in book 1 and hearing an overview of the book, so just running the 20 minutes nonstop. Obviously, you're only hearing each piece once, so if you get to A2, for example, which is a very sequential piece, it's not a tune that I personally whistle walking down the sidewalk each day. I'd rather whistle to a 2 instead, but A2 being so sequential, it needs that intensive repetition for it to stick and have a reference in the brain. So that's one light bulb that has been really helpful for me over the years, is that 10-10-10 concept. We often talk about active listening and passive listening, and passive being just background music playing in the car, playing while we're getting ready for bed, playing during a mealtime, playing during, while we're just playing with toys or doing homework. But I think there's also the concept of active listening. So for example, if your child is a string player and working on vibrato, listening for which notes are having that extra vibrato motion happening, or where are the phrases slowing down, where's some rubato happening, what's happening in the piano part, so that there's more conscious listening happening. Another type of listening that we can think about doing is called parallel listening. So when my students purchase book 1, I'm also having them purchase book 4. So they're doing 1 and 4. When they move into book 2, they're adding the books 5 CDs, so 2 and 5, 3 and 6, that sort of thing. That to me has been really helpful to provide the inspiration for listening. So you as a parent might get tired of hearing Go Tell It Rhodey, but at the same time you might be hearing one of the concertos from book 4. So you're hearing that vision of where you're headed down the road. So that inspiration really lays the groundwork for progress and motivation. I always joke with my parents to say that you as the parent are responsible for putting the CD in or pushing the play button until your child turns 30. It's one of the easiest things we can do, yet it's the first thing I think that is often forgotten in our daily practice. And to me, daily practice is a two-part concept. It's on the instrument as well as the CD itself. So to summarize, to me, listening is really almost 10 times as important as actually the practicing. If you are in a position where you might be traveling or don't have access to an instrument, or you're a pianist and you don't have access to a keyboard, if you can increase your listening, it's amazing what it can do for your learning process. Number 2 is concert attendance. And here at Institute, we have more opportunities probably per day than maybe in your home environment in terms of attending a concert. But there's something to be said about the motivation of hearing a professional artist play. For example, this week, Monday night, we had Peter Thomas as the guest artist cellist. And even if you're not a cellist, hearing that the concept of his sense of tone, his sense of musicality and phrasing is so important for you as a parent as well as your child in the learning process. Attending a concert also has the social aspect, and I think we often think of, we're going to hear the music, but attending a concert has that interaction. Perhaps you can see who else in your group class is going to an upcoming concert, or you as a parent could help your teacher form a sign-up sheet for going to hear Itzhak Perlman at the orchestra hall coming up. Whatever artist is coming into town, if you can make it an opportunity to hear that with your child, it would be so motivational. Going back to the social aspect, I often think for the teenage years, this is something that keeps them going, and oftentimes having the social interaction is almost more important than actually doing things on the instrument itself. I have a colleague who often jokes about if she could just put the teens on a bus and drive around in circles for an hour, it would create that same stimulation. It was sort of a field trip to nowhere. The importance of being with peers at that point in their life is so important. Many of us live in towns where there is a university and there are so many free concerts, so you don't have to pay that high ticket price to hear Perlman. You can see what's happening amongst the faculty at your local university and take advantage of that. If you have a child that's young and you feel like it's a long evening or a long afternoon to attend the full concert, I really suggest you think about committing to attending through until intermission. And I think that provides a wonderful exposure without you feeling like the child is falling asleep in the second half or getting antsy, or you're having to do more behavior control than it seems worth it. we're trying to create that musical environment similarly to nurturing a garden to grow with providing fertilizer and water. Hearing live music is so important, as well as what I talked about earlier with hearing your CD. I think of number one as more CD listening, and number two as more live listening. And to me, the aspect of sharing a live concert, a live performance together, is a totally different feeling than hearing that same piece on a CD. Number three, establishing a regular and workable review routine. The 3 R's, regular review routine. Doing review or doing something well requires doing it over and over again, and you're really building skills in the process of that repetition. So it's important for you as a parent to find something a child is doing well and then ask them to be repeating that on their instrument so that they're building those skills and having them stick so that they're reliable at the next practice. This will eliminate a lot of frustration as you continue to work through the Suzuki repertoire. Dr. Suzuki has a wonderful quote. It says, "Let your child repeatedly practice the pieces he can already play and emphasize the building of ability with familiar pieces. This fosters fine ability." So we think about why we're reviewing. One is to maintain an old skill or technique. So you're, once again, not frustrated with, oh, I used to be able to play that piece, but how does it go now? I think that really derails a child in terms of their self-confidence. So if you do have a review plan going on a daily basis, you can eliminate a lot of frustration that might be happening. Review also provides us the ability to strengthen a new skill, for example, adding vibrato to an easier piece. Review develops musical expression. We don't necessarily have to think about what note or what fingers needing to be placed next, but we can work on the artistry of that note. We always have a piece ready to play, which really results in a lot of increase of self-confidence and self-esteem. I think back upon my own background. I started piano and then I added violin, both traditionally. So I did not grow up in the Suzuki method. And for me, once I finished a piece, I put it up on the shelf and I never touched it again. So if I had relatives visit from out of town, and if I hadn't had a recital for 6 months, I really didn't have anything to play for them. And to them, that was really disappointing not to be able to hear my instrument. And to me, I sort of felt like I was somewhat of a failure because I didn't have anything to share. I think the gift of the Suzuki method is the students always have something in their back pocket to share with either a stranger or a close friend or a relative. If you think about how the repertoire is structured, 80% of a new piece is old material, 20% is new material. So if you do have a regular review routine happening, when you start a new piece, essentially you have the skills already set. 80% of those skills are already baked in and ready to go, and you just need to really be concentrating on that new note or the new bowing and the new pedal technique. Keeping review going also expands our memory. So you think about a student who does review regularly, the amount of information they're having in their brain is pretty incredible. We keep adding another file folder as we add another piece. I have a colleague in Sweden, Sven Sprogren, who talks about the true beauty of review. And he says, the beauty of review is walking a path the same day and seeing it with fresh eyes. I think that's such a beautiful statement. If you think about how many times this week, it's now Thursday, how many times you might have walked from the parking lot to Noel Fine Arts, or from the dorm over to the cafeteria, or from your hotel to your car and driven over to campus. And things that you might have seen the first day are different than you're seeing on Tuesday and different than you see on Wednesday or Thursday. We start hearing our pieces differently after they've been played over and over and over, so they're internalized in such a way that now we're hearing at a different level. Both a level of understanding as well as just the quality too. Review must have a focus. So I think one of the things that we as teachers and we as parents can fall into the trap of just feeling like we're just gonna run the pieces over and over and over. And if you can work with your teacher to have some general goals, so for example, maybe you're working on the curved fourth finger, or the bent thumb, or a certain type of posture. You can have all these goals on separate index cards, and then you, for each review piece, you can pull out a different card and say, oh, hey, we're gonna play that piece, keeping our fourth finger on the tip of the bow each time. We'll see how we do on that. So that the review seems more relevant than just feeling like it's mindless repetition. My teacher, Mr. Kendall, used to say we use the pieces to build our technique. And I think it's so important to think about keeping our bones strong, keeping the vegetables going, and eating that technique, eating those vegetables, so that as we add another piece in the repertoire, that we have the foundation to build upon. So number 4 on our list of 7 is practice consistency. Regularity and consistency are really the true keys to success. When we think about organizing our practice time, oftentimes we as adults think about when it will work conveniently in our schedule, and that does need to be taken into consideration, but often we need to think about what's going to be the best time of the day for your child to practice. It might not be your best functioning time, but it might be your child's best functioning time. Is it before school? Is it after school? Is it after dinner? Is it before dinner? When will your child be most productive and most focused? To me, I'm a morning person, so if I can get up and get at least a half hour in before I head out the door, I'm in a better place than when I come home mid-afternoon and try to get some practice time in, which is a lot better than when I'm picking it up after my teaching day too. Growing up, I know for me, we had to sort of shift all of my practice routines in relation to my sister and brother in the house, because I suddenly felt like I really needed to get all my practice time done in the morning. So we had to kind of shift where the bedrooms were in the house. I was originally sharing a bedroom with my sister, and it wasn't working for me to practice at 6 a.m. when she was just, getting out of bed herself. So we had to kind of shift the structure of the house to make the practice time be more functional for everyone. What works for your family might not work for another family either, and I think that's important too, both as teachers as parents. Or what works for your older child is not necessarily going to work for your younger child in terms of the time. I have a great quote from Star Trek, for any Star Trek people. Captain Kirk didn't have to know more than the others on the ship, but rather he just needed to know how to organize them. And I think that's really important, is in terms of trying to figure out in your weekly schedule how to organize your practice. Looking at a calendar and knowing that on Mondays practice is going to happen right after school, but on Tuesdays practice needs to happen maybe after dinner, so that it is actually a scheduled activity versus, well, it'll happen sometime. And before you know it, it's 9:30 and your child's exhausted, and at that point everyone's sort of at wit's end and might not be the best interchange in your day. How many of you have done the 100 Days Practice Club before? So we have a couple teachers, some parents. I'm going to start with parents. Can you share a little bit about your experience? Let's start with positives, and we can also share downsides too.
It motivates.
Motivates, okay. Keeping it going, right?
People point that out and they don't want to practice.
We don't want to lose a day, right? We're going to keep
They
going.
want to start over.
Yes. Other thoughts?
Well, I think it's important because we have so many small goals and how we're achieving, our polished pieces and our new pieces, we're taking it in little chunks. I think it's good for them to see a bigger picture thing, a larger goal of practice instead of, so sort of dovetailing with what you're saying about motivation. I think having a bigger goal is really good for them too. Because
Right.
I think in little pieces and having a bigger piece
I think it's
makes a difference.
a really important point that sometimes we get stuck in the forest and we don't see the trees, or what I have the saying reversed.
Exactly.
We get so zoned in on what's happening here that we don't see the long-term picture. And that long-term picture is really important to keep us
I
encouraged
think
and
they
going.
need to see it too,
Mhm.
because You know, it helps them think of it as more of a bigger part of their life and not just this little piece that they deal with every day.
Right, right.
Our teacher does a practice and listening contest every year over spring break. And she has a big chart and they're supposed to put stickers in and everybody's names, so you can see everybody's progress. And it's a little bit of a competition, but they all can win, right? And I just put my kids in charge. I just say, if you wanna do this, you can do this, and you can be a part of it if you want. We always go on vacation, and so we have our own little set of rules. So when we come back, they have to practice 2 times to make up for the times we were on vacation, but they can't skip the listening. And in the end, I didn't do much, and they're super proud of themselves, and it's like their favorite part of the year.
You bring up a really important point about that the commitment was coming from the child themselves. I have a former family that the children are now in college, and they had come to ASI for many years. Their first year that they came, they went to the talent show. How many of you went to the talent show last night? Okay, so there's a wonderful recognition of anyone who's practiced 100 days in a row or 365 days in a row, 1 year in a row, going all the way up. And this youngster, I think she was 7 at the time, she and her mom were sitting in the audience and saw this happen. And she turned to her mom and said, well, surely I could do 100. And so that was coming from the child, and I think that says a lot in terms of that jumpstart feeling of doing that. What was interesting for this particular situation is she saw the example of these kids walking over the stage at the different amounts. And for her, that was a goal for her to come back next summer and look at that opportunity to be recognized on the stage. And then she was in the situation where once she got rolling, she just kept rolling. So then it turned into several years in a row, and that sort of thing. Did you have something to add? You've done 100 days with your
We
children?
have, and my daughter is very visual and very artistic. And so she liked in the beginning where her instructor gave her a castle on a piece of paper where every block had to be colored. There were 100 blocks outlining this castle. And she just thought that was the most fun. But going with like the bigger picture, I mean, literally seeing the bigger picture for me, that she was accomplishing something, felt better to her than just trying, because we tried just the, we'll mark it, and
Right.
it wasn't working for her, but to have the actual visual to go with it, it just solidified it for her.
There's something about that
So for a
satisfaction.
yes, for a younger kid, that works a little better,
Right.
I think.
Right. Thoughts? I had a few parents on this side of the room. Your dad and
Yeah, we
grandson?
did it when my son first started, and we were new to Suzuki, so it was a great baseline of like, well, we just practice. This isn't really an optional activity, so we haven't really done it since, although yesterday during the talent show, the 100-day kids were up, and I turned to my son and I was like, well, how many days in a row have you practiced? And he was like, well, it's gotta be at least 10 by now. And I was like, well, he's a math kid, he loves math. I was like, well, you're like 1/10 of the way there, should we start? And he was like, yeah, maybe we should. So, yeah.
It's a great concept about the fact that perhaps you're already on a roll and you just haven't realized that you've done 10 in your case, right? And so look back to the last time you missed. And essentially you already started the 100 days without realizing, right? And then just keep it adding on. I know for me as a teacher, it's made a tremendous difference within my studio in terms of hearing a difference in student sound. I'm coming from a violin standpoint, but the reason I say that is there's a constant playing each day. It's like layering paint on the wall. So if you paint the wall, and we're in the art studios, I think, wing of the campus. So if you put one layer on the wall, it looks pretty good, right? But then if you add another layer, you think, oh wow, I'm starting to fill in the specks and the holes. You add a third layer, and it really starts to stand out in terms of everything being more even. And you think about that in relation to that bow to the string. It's just filling in the tone deeper and deeper and deeper. So I can really hear a difference of a student that is on a roll for consistent practice, and part of the club or part of, they've done 7 days in a row versus someone that's done fewer. You also brought up another excellent point about if you're doing 100 days or in your scenario with 10 even, I think it eliminates the question about practice completely. You're no longer asking, well, are we gonna practice? It's more, when are we gonna practice? And so you know it's part of the routine, such as brushing your teeth, or Suzuki used to joke about, well, we only practice on the days we eat, but he really meant it because of that consistent habit we're trying to build. Julie, do you want to share a little bit from the teacher perspective, what you've seen being helpful within your studio?
Well, it's definitely, it's a motivating factor and a little bit of a healthy competition, but in the way that instead of like, oh, I have to beat so-and-so, it's like, let's all get to 100.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that we did with Spencer when he was doing it, we had milestones. So we had, because 100 can be really intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
So we had 25, 50, 75, and we would just, you know, the teachers would bring stuff from the dollar store or something like that, just something cute for the kids. And then anyone who made it to 100, we treated them to a pizza party. So we had about 7 kids that made it to 100, and it was fun, and it gave the parents and families a chance to socialize.
So you have that combined combination, you have a little incentive, something to look for physically, the pizza party, but some people have done certificates, some people have done ice cream. I think it varies, but if there's some kind of way to celebrate, I think it helps keep that motivation going. For me, because I travel a good deal, what has helped me is to think about the next time I'm going to be traveling where it'll be really hard for me to get my practice done, which in this case is going to be this weekend. So usually what I try to do is look at when the next trip is going to happen. So if I look ahead and say, oh, you know what, I'm not traveling for 14 days, I commit to a 14-day practice, which it might sound a little silly, but for me, it keeps me accountable so that when I land in my next destination, it doesn't take me a few days to get settled and then, oh gosh, now it's the 3rd day, now I'm going to start to practice. It's the first day that I'm starting to practice instead of feeling like I'm getting everything unpacked and put away and, oh, I'm really exhausted, let's go to bed. I'm making sure practice is part of the first day routine too.
Can I just add something
Yeah.
to that? The practice, something that our studio does as well, in a related vein, they do, when the kids get to the point where they're starting to sight read, they do 100 days of sight reading. And our studio has a subscription to the sight reading factory, and so you can set the level and the key signature and whatever whatever level your child is at, you can fine tune it to that. And then you don't have to do it 100 days in a row, you just have to do it 100 days within a certain period of time. And then they get a certificate and they sort of make a deal about it at the studio too. And for my daughter who just started reading a year ago, she's now quite fluent. And so it makes sort of a huge difference too to add that little piece in and have that be a motivation to learn to read.
Excellent. It's we can approach these repetitions in different ways, and you gave an excellent example about working on a skill set, a repetition of something 100 times, and it's once again it's that long-term project, but you do see some kind of outcome or some kind of culmination for receiving that 100 times. I know personally as a teacher, I do a lot of 100 times charts, and what I mean by that is perhaps we're practicing a certain skill, just learning how to, in the beginning stages, doing a bowl hold, so that I have a different series of charts that the students working through, so that I know from my perspective that they actually have done enough repetitions so they have that muscle memory working for them. If we can get this consistent practice routine in place, to me it really lays the foundation for less frustration during the teenage years. How many of you, once again, have teenagers currently in the process? So if we can have something going, and then when we get, here's what Duke's right here. Perfect. Sometimes that's a time period where you're balancing even more, right? In terms of schedule and activities that the kids want to be pursuing. And if we can make sure practice is already one of those things that's happening versus one thing that we have to re-add or remind ourselves to add, then we feel like it's just something that we are doing instead of feeling like there's a struggle about getting it in. Okay, I think we're gonna go forward a little bit. Group class. Group class is one of the most motivating things that we can provide for a child, and it really builds the sense of team and confidence. We're developing our abilities through group class, but there are so many other side effects that group class brings. One is for you as parents. You have a built-in network of other parents. And even in this room right here, we have a wonderful resource between parents and teachers that we can pick each other's brains about. But you can be at group class and you can perhaps be really frustrated with, once again, learning that book one etude piece I referred to earlier. And you can turn to your neighbor and say, you know, when John was working on that, did it feel like life stopped and you were on hold for several months? How did you overcome that hurdle? And oftentimes just talking to the other parent makes your learning process so much more encouraging, and you walk away with another tool to work on a difficult concept with. Social league groups provide times where students can be together. Perhaps they might not see those students outside of a group setting. Perhaps some families are traveling a greater distance, so they're coming in from group class and they have to travel an hour and a half, and they might not necessarily come into the community except for group class and their private lesson. Group reinforces what I call built-in review. You're constantly working on older pieces and refining them. We're polishing those skills. We're being inspired by others. We are also learning from others. And the power of learning is pretty impressive without us even realizing it. Just if you think about your child's rep class this week and you just stand back and observe it from afar, I think you'll see a lot of interactions that you might be surprised about how they're learning from each other. This week I'm teaching a lot of large rep group classes, and it's been interesting to see the kids start to be accountable for each other. I'll have a long tuning line, and some of the kids will actually go back to the back of the line and say, remember, your violin needs to be in rest position during tuning time. And it's interesting to see how they start to make sure that their behavior is appropriate for what's happening in the class. We talked about how groups support you as a parent, as well as the learning experience for your child. So the more you can think about making sure group is part of your routine, it's on the calendar, it's not something, once again, that you're adding to your schedule, it's already part of your schedule. And so that it's just part of the habit. I can compare this to exercise for me because I kind of go up and down. If I love to walk in the early mornings and get a walk done before I actually completely wake up in the morning. But if I wake up and then decide in a few hours to take a walk, I already feel as if my day is underway and yikes, I have so many things to do, I'm gonna have to skip the walk. But if I do it fresh in the morning, it's done and I feel better and I started my day. So I formed that habit and I have my exercise in my routine. Once I stop doing any of that walking, then I realize it takes me longer to hop back on and get it back in my routine. So same thing with group. You know, if you're in a weekly group or every other week group, the more you can just make sure that it is happening, I think you'll see an incredible benefit from it. How many of you are in programs or studios that have weekly group classes? Okay. And what about people that maybe have group every other week? All right. What about once a month? Once a month, people? Okay. Anyone in a situation where groups are not happening yet? Okay. So maybe it's a conversation you can be having with your teacher to see if something can happen. I always think that a group can happen with a group of two, because there it is, two people, right? So you can think about, it can be as small as 2 or as big as, in this case here, 25. The next one, number 6, is a very important part. It's all of you in the room here, parent involvement. You're here because you're committed. First of all, you're here at the Institute because you're committed. You also decided to come to a lecture to learn more for yourself. But I just want to reinforce the value of your role in the Suzuki method. It's so important to be part of the process, and what I mean by that is really being intentionally present, attending your child's lessons and group classes, and not to think of it as a drop-off activity because you need to run an errand and pick up dry cleaning and that sort of thing. Today's society keeps pulling our attention in so many different directions all at the same time. I find myself being pulled in many directions instead of trying to be mindfully present at the moment. So I personally have a no cell phone policy in my studio unless someone's taking their phone up to video a clip in the lesson or to take a picture. The reason is I want to make sure that I have the full support of the parent taking the notes and staying with me in the moment instead of suddenly realizing, oh, there's that email coming in that I need to address. So if you feel like you're starting to be pulled away in several directions, try putting that phone out of sight. I know I have to do that in my own practice because suddenly I realize, oh, look at a text came in. Look at that. Before I know it, my hour of practice has stopped after 20 minutes, and then I started answering emails, and now my hour's up because I have to be somewhere. Garrison Keeler, her Prairie Home companion, often says relationships don't happen through binoculars. We must be there at the practice itself. So the practice of forming the relationship. And one thing that we in the Suzuki method are doing are trying to build stronger relationships between the parent, child, and teacher. And being present is what makes this all happen. I recently was processing an interview by Bob Duke, and Bob is on faculty at University of Texas, Austin, and he's done a lot of consulting work for the Suzuki Association. And he was asked, what do you think is the biggest contribution that Suzuki education has made to music education? And he said, the most obvious one is the fact that Suzuki education is engaging both the child and the parent in collaborative learning experiences. That typically doesn't happen in any kind of activities that the parents provide for their children. They often take them there and drop them off, and that's pretty much the end of it. Go to soccer and occasionally cheer from the sidelines. But Suzuki involves being intimately part of the learning process, and it creates a different kind of relationship between the parent and child. And that's what all of you are part of, and I think it's a good reminder and a good compliment to all of you that your time is well invested. You're the cheerleader, you provide the positive environment. You're believing in them. And by believing in them, the child really comes to believe in themselves, and I think that's our ultimate goal as well. As all of you know, practice isn't always easy, right? And I think acknowledging the frustrations is important to be doing. One of my former students talks about the pit in the gut, and I had to ask him when he was 5 what he meant by the pit in the gut. And he and his mom were working on Lightly Row, and they essentially came to a hurdle, a roadblock. And they worked and they worked and they worked, and finally they succeeded and overcame the roadblock. But he was becoming so frustrated that he said to his mom, my stomach hurts, it's almost like I have a pit in my gut. And they worked through it, and then they were able to talk about it. And then later in book 1, he got to Minuet 2, and he was coming to another hurdle, and he was getting frustrated, and his mom was able to say, hey, do you remember when we were on Lightly Row? You talked about that pit in your gut. And we overcame that at that point too. It wasn't easy, but we overcame it, and eventually we moved forward. And for him to remember that and realize it gave him encouragement to say, hey, I think I'm gonna overcome this hurdle at the moment in Minuet 2. So thinking about, how much tension in a practice is acceptable. Is it, at this point in your practice, is it something you just want to walk away from and start fresh tomorrow? Or is it best to push forward and, have more tension, or perhaps just let it sit and settle overnight? It could bake, the habit could start to form and then start fresh and renewed the next day. All of these things take time, and Betsy Stone Walker, a viola teacher, often talks about TTT. Things take time, and I love that statement because I think it's a good reminder that what we're doing isn't a fast food process. It's not something you just drive through and pick up, Gavotte and G minor, and you're done with it. We're really building on resilience and learning how to work through difficult situations. All right.
Can I ask a question before you move on?
Yes.
Could you just elaborate a little bit on how that changes as the child matures and becomes a teenager and becomes more independent, and how you step away but still remain involved?
Yes, so as the role of as the parent, right. So this is something that each teacher works through differently, and also each teacher might be working through it differently according to each relationship. Some teachers feel like at a certain age there's more of a cutoff. Other teachers might do a gradual weaning process. I tend to customize it per child so that with time, even from the beginning, I'm giving some ownership along the way, but with time, I'm having the parent gradually step back so that in those teenage years, it could be that the child's coming completely alone. It could be that the parent's still there, but they're pretty much in a backseat position in terms of there you are pretty far in the back of the room and we're working here in the lesson and you're just there as the note taker and to clarify things periodically. So I handle it different ways with each student, but I feel that it's important to have that open door communication between the parent, child, and teacher so you know what's going to work best for your child. I always tell all my parents, you know your child the best, and the more information you can help me with, the better I can teach them. The other thing that I want to mention in relation to your question is I always tell my students as they're going into those junior high and high school years is my job is to put myself out of a job. And what I mean by that is so that I've given the child enough tools to know how to practice so that by the time they graduate from high school, they can essentially solve problems, you know, for the most part, on how to approach a new passage. And so hopefully with each year and each book and each development, I'm starting to give them the greater role. So, you know, our original Suzuki triangle that you might think equilateral is gonna shift with time. You know, in the early stages that the parents are so much more hands-on involved with that young 3, 4, 5-year-old. But then everything's gonna shift so that when we get over to the teenage years, the student side of the triangle is so much more prominent than the others. So the last one is somewhat related to what you said because trusting your teacher, they have a vision of where your child is headed. They have that vision of the accomplished learner in their mind. And they're also obviously the expert in their field and have taught students going through those books before. They've worked with students going through those teenage years. And the more you can use them as a resource, the better. If you're not sure, you know, what the teacher's goal is or what the assignment is, I always say make sure you ask before you leave. And obviously, keeping the open door communication in terms of emailing questions or saying you can set up a phone call, that sort of thing, to clarify assignments. But before you leave that lesson, if you can make sure, you know, is it really measure 5 that needs to be done 10 times? I feel like there's resistance at home where, you know, we were supposed to do 5 times, but how many times were we really supposed to do that section? But if parents really writing down, as Christie says, that's a 10-time spot, then there's less argument that's happening. Take advantage of the events that your teacher is suggesting, such as attending those concerts I referred to earlier, or going to recitals, or having some kind of get-together socially. Will really build a community within your studio. So if we look at the 7 points that I mentioned, we had listening, concert attendance, regular review, practice consistency, group class, parent involvement, and trusting your teacher. If you think about your current situation and you think about where some of those slumps might be, maybe there's one of the 7 that you feel like you need to re-engage. Perhaps the listening needs to have an extra dose. As you head into the fall, just think about how you could maybe rebalance the 7 so that things are working more effectively for you. I think the ultimate goal is to think about, well, why are we doing really what we're doing? And to me, it boils back down to Suzuki's statement that we're trying to create noble human beings. And we're working on developing their characters through the study of an instrument. Thinking about enjoying the moment, celebrating the little things. And wherever you are in your journey, you're still learning from each other, and I think that's really important. You're learning from your child's learning from you, you're learning from the teacher, you're learning from your co-parents at groups and co-parents within the studio. So tap into all those resources. I'll be up here if you have questions at the end, or if you want to follow up with anything I said, but thank you so much for coming, and I know we're at the end of the institute, but I hope you sail on through the final concert in a positive way. Thank you.